Hello, everyone. Owen here from Gaming with the Cooler. I just gave it a few moments there to let everybody kind of shuffle their way in, make their way into the live stream. Because, of course... I don't have myself muted. I'm listening to myself. There we go. Because, of course, I didn't give any notice that I'm going to do a live stream. And that's just the reality of it. I put on Regions of Ruin, where we'll play a little bit of that kind of in the background. But the premise of today's live show is I wanted to talk about something that I recently had an interaction with at a ITC Warhammer 40k tournament this past weekend or the weekend before it. I don't know. It was a little while ago, and I wanted to talk about that and my experience dealing with Warhammer 40k and chess clocks or timed player turns rather than just an event timer. And how I see it, some tips and tricks, because one of the things I've seen is that people are not familiar with how you should treat a chess clock, especially in the 40k community. And then the realities of how they want to do scoring for these bigger events, as far as like ITC is concerned, and what that means to people who don't want to use chess clocks versus how they do want to use them. And like I said, some tips and tricks on how to play within that context. But yeah, I didn't really give any notice. Today was a very last minute-y kind of thing. We're gonna play at human level. Human is difficult. Of course, dwarf is the hardest difficulty because living like a dwarf is the hardest. I want to use my keyboard, I think. There we go. Yeah, so we're going to talk about that. I'm going to be going away for a week. It is my birthday in 2 days, and so I'm going to be not here. I'm going to try and put out 1 or 2 battle reports, though, this next week while I'm away. I've got them up there and ready to be uploaded. I haven't actually sat down and done the upload, but we'll get some content out there. It was at Black Knight Games is where this tournament took place. Pretty small. It wasn't. I think there's only like 12 or 15 people there or something. Actually, no. It might have been more than that. It might have been in the 20s. I don't know. I don't really remember. It was just another 40k event where I got to go and play some games. That was how I look at it. But they had chess clocks. So let's talk a little bit about what it means for a chess clock to be in your game. So mechanically, the way these things work, for anyone who's not sure what it is I'm talking about, the clocks are a way to make it so that players cannot sandbag. They can't run out the clock on a round so as to deprive your opponent of points, or to win by getting points early and then the clock timer running out and then no longer being able to do anything about that. And so that's right, E is to talk. I don't remember how to play this. There we go. Give me a second here. Let me get my game going again. Go. All right. Yes. So talking about tournaments and this tournament, essentially you have this chess clock that's going to prevent someone from being able to sandbag time. The way that you would do that is things like a mass army using lots of orcs or gaunts or guardsmen or something along those lines, where your turn takes a lot of time of moving your guys, collecting up all the dice, rolling tons of dice, rolling your rerolls to hit or your rerolls when you successfully hit, or whatever it may be, whatever mechanic, and just taking a long time to play. Now, it's not always going to be because you're actively trying to screw your opponent by running out of time. It can also simply be a case of, well, my army takes a long time to play, and so that's just how it is. That's kind of where the problem comes in for this, because currently the scoring system. So that's a basis. The idea of the clock is to prevent one person from being able to do that, to take a long time. And then the method, of course, is that when the clock is on you, you flip. Is the clock priority based, like whenever you have to react, roll armor saves, etc.? Yeah, it is. So if it's an active thing that you're responsible for, the clock is on your time. So if I'm moving my guys, my time is going down. If I'm rolling my dice to shoot you, my time is going down. If armor saves need to be made, your time is going down. If Overwatch is being made, your time is going down. If you have to pile in, your time is going down. If I'm piling in, my time is going down. So you need to be pretty active. It's not a matter of just setting it up and then letting it run for everything your opponent does on their turn. You want to be paying attention and actively using it. It's just a flick back and forth for that. The one we played, it had a 60-minute timer, and so you had 1 hour to play a 6-turn, 1,500-point game of Warhammer 40k. Essentially, it means it'd be a 2-hour game, 2-hour round timer. That's pretty good. Like a 2-hour game should be something you can accomplish in like 1,500 points. A lot of people didn't do it. And from what I understand, I don't follow the tournament meta in 40k, to be honest, but I heard a lot that one of the big events recently, that people were only getting to turn 3 or 4. And that even in the previous one, people were only getting to turn 3 or 4. The problem is, especially in the ITC system, is you score every turn based on how good you do or what objectives you accomplish, things like that. And so if you don't make it to those later turns, and another person on another table does, through no fault of your own, whether you were winning or losing, if your opponent simply took a long time to play their turn, once again, not necessarily because they are actively sandbagging the clock or actively trying to manipulate the system so as to prevent you from scoring points, you will still lose. That person on the table over will be arbitrarily further ahead than you are. That's kind of the reason why you need to have these, if you want to score it that way. Now, I don't think you have to necessarily do that, but that's neither here nor there. This is the reality of what it is right now, and so you have to learn to play within that mechanic. So what do you do about it? Well, there's two modes of thought. One is just don't play it. Don't play with clocks. If you can just play a fun game, you have a 2-hour round timer, you get to as many turns as you can, and that's the way you play your game. Absolutely, that is an option. All right, I've got to remember how to. Oh, gotta block. I thought it was... Bitch. There we go. What was the sneaky key? Is it shift? No, shift is to block. I thought it was double tap to roll. Anyway. Yeesh, my local 1.5, they usually about 40 minutes to finish. Admittedly, as my army is small, it either wins fast or dies fast. Well, that's kind of what I'm going to talk about too. Is, well, how do you play so that you're fighting within the bounds of that that kind of meta where you need to pass within a certain amount of time? So here's 2 armies, and one of them is an army that I played against. He had 2 units of Devastators with 4 or 8 las cannons total, and then a number of heavy bolters. We were using the new bolter mechanic, so everyone got to shoot twice if they stayed still at long range. Blah, blah, blah. You all know the beta rules for the bolters, I'm sure, at this point. He had his Chapter Master and Primaris Lieutenant so that he could reroll to hit, as well as getting the reroll ones to wound. He had a couple big tanks that could also provide extra, like he had like a Vanquisher, and then he had some scouts with snipers. So like a kind of all-rounders Space Marine list. You've got your commander, you've got your troops, you've got your heavy support. He had some tanks, and he had some like scouty snipers, fast-moving dudes. My army, on the other hand, was one playing up to the idea of how this is going to work. It was 3 Tyrannofexes with the flamethrower cannons. I forget what they're called right now, but the flamethrowers that auto-hit. The Malathope, so that they were -1 to hit. The Swarm Lord, some Gaunts, some deep striking Ripper Swarms, and a sized hero duel, or barbed hero duel. And that was it. And so you can see kind of off the bat, the reality is I only ever had to move really like 5 models a turn. Because the Gaunts were just going to run to an objective, and then that would be it for 1 turn. The Rippers are going to deep strike, and somewhere out of line of fire in his deployment, so I can score the in your deployment and the in the 4 quarters. The 4 models, 5, 6 models that make up my army are going to just walk in unison up the middle. And then when rolling to attack, I only have a few attacks that are very powerful. Don't need to roll to hit, just rolling to wound and damage. Makes it so that I always know how many dice I'm going to roll, and I don't have to do anything first. What this meant for him was on his turn, on his clock, he picks a unit of Space Marines. He chooses a target. He decides he's going to shoot one of my Tyrannifexes, because that's the one that's there. He picks up all of his... He counts out the number of Space Marines he has. In this case, let's say 10. They shoot 20 times. He hits on 3s, but he's -1 to hit, so he's hitting on 4s. He can reroll 1s and 2s, but not 3s, because of the way the mods work for rerolls after mods, or before mods or something. Anyway, reroll before mods, and then after they don't. So he picks up 40 dice, or 20 dice, rolls them on the table. So first he had to count those Space Marines, then he had to count the number of dice. So he gathered up 20 of his dice. Then he rolls them. Then out of those dice, he has to pick out all the 1s and 2s, not the 3s. They have to go separate. They're done. Then he re-rolls the 1s and 2s. Once again, then pulling out 1, 2, and 3. You take that away. Then you're left with his hits. And those are his 4, 5s, and 6s. He then rolls those. Now he's looking for 6s in this case. Maybe he's looking for 5s. Maybe he's looking for 3s. It doesn't really matter. Then he's re-rolling his 1s to hit. He has to find the 1s. Re-roll all of those. Finally, now he's collected them up. He says how many he's done. Clock flips to me. I make my armor saves. Clock flip back to him. He goes to his next unit. Just describing that, you know how long that takes. And to give comparison, the clock flips to me. I shoot with my Tyrannifex. I roll 2d6, whatever number, let's say 7 dice. I roll my dice, 3s to wound, flick to him. He does his armor saves, flicks to me. I roll for damage. Often you don't even have to roll for damage because they're individual unit, like 1 wound models that are dying, or they're vehicles and it's 1 and you just count them up. That's all you have to do. And you can see inherently how fast that's going to be in comparison. You could, you're going to have to take this into consideration now whenever you build an army. Maybe you want to build small armies already, and this isn't going to affect you all that much. But it might. Keep in mind, you're not going to want to use things like Terminators with Stormbolters. You're not going to want to use Stormbolters really at all, especially if you're an army that depends on rerolls, because it's too many dice. You're going to spend a lot of time. Holy Crayon, all those dice rolls could be done efficiently if you planned it out. And they can be. And I'm going to get into that, sort of how you can do that. But first I'm going to talk about the two ways that you can play about this clock in a way that is something of a metagame. Let's do the first one here. I'll respond to Holy Crayons. His comment was, all of these dice rolls could be done efficiently if you planned it out. So this is one way of going about playing this game. Build an army using your normal plans on how you're gonna build an army, whatever it is you want, and organize your dice based on what amount of fire each unit can do. Also, yes, I want to say that dice apps are usually not going to be allowed. Most people aren't going to let you use those. At least I certainly wouldn't. I would say that you're not allowed to use a dice app. I actually think you shouldn't be allowed to use movement trays for units either, though that's a little bit further on. But I'm going to make an argument that because it's outside of the bounds of the game, I feel like that's really not going to be a thing. But that's neither here nor there. Maybe that'll change. That's just my opinion. I don't think you should be allowed to use things that are beyond the scope of the original game. Because you're going to directly affect the way the game is going to be played. I'm going to explain why you can abuse the shit out of this as I go a little bit further in here. But the first one is, build an army, organize your dice. I use it by color. Like for that fella who had the Space Marines, he knows that he's going to fire 20 dice per group. You have exactly 20 dice. And you always know that that's how many it is. And then you have 4 purple dice or something, 4 blue dice, 4 white dice, 4 green dice, for each of your las cannon teams. And then you can instantly just go this group to this group to that group to that group, and you have to know your opponent's army, so you know what you need to hit and to wound on. Don't depend on them, don't have to ask them. So you're going to have to know their army in advance, and then that's how you go and play. You do everything as efficiently as you can. You could have your movement trays so that your units move in clumps. You go, I pick up this one little piece of wood, 5 guys move, 5 guys move. My army is done. Same thing for deployment. You have them ready to go in trays before you're ready to deploy. That's why I don't think you're going to be allowed to use trays if you want to use clocks, because it's going to change the way using this non-game mechanic tool to modify the way that game mechanics are going to be played in. But once again, we'll get to that. So that's one way of doing it. You can build an army, plan out your army using all of these, the method of pre-planning how you're going to play out your turn before you actually play it out. Have your dice ready, have your movement, have widgets that are all the length of the number of inches your guys can move. So imagine you're playing an army where most of your guys have a movement of 5 inches. Get a whole bunch of 5-inch rulers and just have them ready. So when you go to move, you literally just put it down on the table, you pick up the movement tray, put them at the end of the measuring tape, and don't even pick it up again. Have another one for your next unit, and then just go 1 unit, 2 unit, 3 unit, 4 unit, done, and have your movement phase done quickly. Don't remeasure everything. Don't have to move model by model. Have them move in big uniform chunks. So this is, and then the other side of that, of course, is if you just play a small model count like I did with monstrous creatures who are ignoring phases, whether it's ignore psychic, ignore melee, ignore shooting, ignore aspects of shooting, you could do that. That's an easier way to do it. Like, play a knight list, and you're inherently not going to run into that much of a problem because you have a lot less models and a lot less dice are being used. And your accuracy and such is pretty high, so mods aren't going to matter as much. Anyway, here's the other way you could play into this. And this is Ash and I were talking about it, and this is sort of you're no longer playing Warhammer 40k if you want to go down this route. Like, you're technically playing within the rules and the context of the game, but you're not playing the way the game is meant to be played. And I know there's a lot of you can't play with your models wrong, don't tell me how to play right with my little toy mans, but this is what it is. 2,000 points. You have 3 shock attack guns. You have 210 to 250 boys. You build movement trays that are 12 inches by 12 inch circles with a line running across the center and a smaller circle inside of the greater circle. You build, I think it was 8 of these, and you deploy your units of 30 boys on each one of these trays with a small hook sitting up from the center of the tray. You cover your entire deployment with this. You bring a collection of weird boys and these shock attack guns. In each unit, you have 1, maybe 2, but probably just 1 rocket boy, rocket launcher. And your turn consists, and once again, you have the widgets, you have those things ready to go. You have your widgets ready to go. Turn 1 for you, and then you play Death Skulls. You've got 200 and something toughness 4 guys, every single one of which has a 6-up invuln. And every turn, you run forward to get onto objectives, and you Hand of Gork yourself to move your guys into opposite corners of the board. So you can score, hold the 4 zones, hold the enemy deployment, while your shock attack guns, turn by turn, pick away at whatever the scariest big thing is that the enemy team has. Because they're going to have it, whether it's a knight or a baneblade or just big tanks, whatever it may be. With the relic shock attack gun, you're getting 46. Your turn consists of a run, picking up this big tray of each type of guy and moving it how far they run towards the enemy. When you use the Hand of Gork, all you have to do is have a 9-inch widget so you can stay away from whatever's nearby and put them in a far corner away. Don't shoot with your units. Don't fight with your units. Just move up and sit there. Then flip the clock. And let your opponent have to move. Let your opponent figure out who's in which unit. Let your opponent pick up how many dice he wants to shoot. Let your opponent have to roll all of his rerolls. Let your opponent use his big guns wasted on shooting orcs. But he has to roll them separately because he can't roll his high strength weapon at the same time as his low strength weapon. Let him get all of his rerolls and see if they can chew through 200 and something boys, every one of which has an invuln, within whatever amount of time there is in the game, while you're actively removing his biggest and most effective pieces at doing that. When the game gets nearer to the end, you actually start playing, or if he clocks himself. Then you immediately, because the way the game works right now is if your clock runs out, your opponent continues to take turns, and the only thing you're allowed to do is make armor saves. And so you're able to just play turn after turn with them being able to do nothing in defense, while your orcs walk around and hold objectives. Other armies, I'm sure, can do this to some degree as well. This is simply one that I thought of because of the Hand of Gork and shock attack guns being very effective at moving units and removing units. But I'm sure Guard could do this to some degree. Tyranids probably have a way to do it with millions of Gaunts and Zoanthropes. But, like, look at what it is you're trying to do there. You play ITC, move up on the 1 or 2 objectives. Okay, well, turn 1, you're guaranteed to get one of them, and then you Hand of Gork onto the second, and then... Or Hand of Gork in front of your opponent's army, 30 guys across, blocking their movement, so he has to fight that unit. And you don't even fight back. You just let him fight it and shoot it and kill it, whatever. Make your saves on your clock and then be done. But now he has to do that. He has to fight these guys. Has to get past them. And keep in mind, you have six or like foot-sized squares blocking all planes, all deep strikes, all outflanks. Like, if your opponent depends on dropping troops in, they're just dead. You're going to cover the whole board almost immediately. You're going to cover it in such a way, based on the way you've designed your movement trays, that there's no way to actually play this. It is, like, anathema to fun in this game. Like, I don't know... Like, but the problem is, what do you say to that? Do you tell that orc guy that he's not allowed to play? Like, oh, you're not playing within the spirit of the game? Neither are clocks. Those aren't in the mechanics of the game. This is why I'm kind of the argument that I think you need to ban non-gameplay essential items. So, what are the things you essentially need to play this game? You need a measuring tape, you need dice, and you need miniatures, and then your rulebook. Anything beyond that, I think you have to get rid of. I think you have to get rid of movement trays. I think you have to get rid of measuring widgets. I think you have to get rid of dice rollers. Anything that you can use as a way to abuse the fact that now you're being timed, because these are things that you're going to have to additionally buy in that are outside of the scope of what you need to actually play the game. Because, like, right now, let's say you and I are both playing orcs, and you have your 30 boys and I have my 30 boys, and we have timed turns. If my 30 boys are on a movement tray and yours are not, I am going to be in a better position than you are for no reason. The reason for... I'm not going to go... You can go back, Holy Crayon. The reason for the clocks is essentially to moderate control in tournaments so that you don't end up in a situation where one player can clock the other person by just playing slowly. It is a thing. It is already... It's spreading all throughout the game. So, anyway, that's kind of two perspectives on how to play into clocks. You can in one way... learn your army and build small effective forces, or have dice and items prepared to make your army ready to play. Or the other way, where you build a thing that is so built around attrition, where you are... And the other logic is, don't necessarily go with a huge wave of orcs covering the whole board. You could take very few incredibly obnoxious durable units and an army of small characters and just scatter across the world. Deathclock from War Machine. What a mistake. And this is some of it from War Machine, John. Like, this is what I'm referring to. You could play a Cadian army with millions of guardsmen on 10-person movement trays. So the one that's 5 with another 5 slightly off from it from behind. And then dozens of characters. And all you do is you run your guys forward to make them take wounds, while your characters get into spots that are very difficult to get line of sight on. So you run into the corners of pieces of terrain. You model all of your models to be prone or crouching and hiding behind objects. You squirrel your army everywhere so that your opponent can't actively kill you. You get all over the board. And you're not doing this because you're trying to defeat an enemy army in the game. You're doing it because you want to win, and you know the death clock will make you win. And it's like... Anyway, I'm not a fan of it. I think it breaks the spirit of what it is to play Warhammer 40k, Age of Sigmar, these other games. But here's the other thing, and it goes back to what I said right at the very beginning. What do you do? What do you do to fix the problem of scoring the way they have it now without adding clocks? So let's say, once again, you and I are at a tournament. I'm playing with my orcs, and my orc army's got a bunch of boys. It's got a bunch of shootas and lutas and all kinds of orky stuff. I've got some trucks. You have a perfectly designed anti-orc list, whatever that may be. And so the odds are likely that I'm going to die. You're gonna weather my fire, and you've got a lot of anti-infantry. You've got some medium strength guns to kill my lighter vehicles. And so it's not looking good for me. And the dice are in your favor. You're successfully killing my guys. But there's only 2 hours in the round, and it takes me a long time to move all my guys. And so we only get to turn 3 or 4. You win, sure, but you only score up to turn 4. And the guy on the table next to us, well, he was playing another small force army, and they got to turn 6. So he scored 12 extra points than you. Then you won your game. And through no fault of your own, and no fault necessarily of your opponent, he's playing with the rules and the models and the way the army and the way the game is meant to be played, resulted in you not scoring and you not quote-unquote winning. And here's the worst side of it too, right? That's one perspective. Now let's say your opponent is the malicious type, the kind of person that I'm describing who would make the orc list that I created. I'm just saying it could be me. I score 8 or 12 points really fast. Well, I have 1 million guys all over. Then you continue to win, and you don't clock yourself, but the round ends, or you get right to the end. But we make it to round 6. But I scored so many points early and sandbagged so hard that there wasn't much you could do about it. I just flooded the board. And then when I would have normally clocked myself, I didn't, because I simply just avoided using my clock to actually play the game. I didn't shoot with my orcs. I only fired the rockets. Because they're blue and they're all in separate units, I only ever fired 6 or 12 rockets that reroll to hit and to wound and to damage. And that's all I ever did. Like... And, alright, here's one. Super Snake. Here's the real question. Are Horde armies even really fun to play or play against? Eliminate Horde armies and these problems go away. I actually think the Horde armies are the more fun armies to play in these games, because I find saves and durability on individual models are less fun. The point of the game is move, pick up, destroy models. And when you play armies that are really hard to remove individual models, they're less fun for your opponent. Fun for you because your guys all live. But there's an equally part of fun of guys dying and having replacements. But that's another discussion. I don't really want to get into it. This is the state of the game currently. We're not going to get rid of Horde armies. I think the real decision needs to be made is, do you want this to happen? Do you want clocks to be this kind of thing that happens? Or do you change the way scoring works? And then the question is, how do you make a scoring system that doesn't depend on you playing the whole game? And that's really difficult. What is the right way to score a game that doesn't necessarily play even numbers of turns, right? Like, what happens if you're playing a game where you can't do end of round scoring because one player might get, you can't do end of turn scoring because a person might get an extra turn or not, and then the round might end. And what if one table plays 6 turns and the other table plays 3 turns? this is a problem. Infinity suffers from this problem too. And I've seen tournaments where Infinity players, they only get to turn 2 because one of the players took a long time and was really unsure, and they didn't know their mechanics very well. And the opponent who was planning on a 3rd turn score lost or didn't win by as much as they needed to because they never got to play their final turn of the game. And what do you say to that? Like, do you bring clocks into Infinity as well? But I'm talking about 40k in particular because you guys don't have experience with the War Machine idea of how a clock needs to be used. I think the only way is to change the way the scoring system works. And the problem with it is no matter what way you do, you have to make it in such a way. I almost think the only way you should be able to score points is victory points. You need to play a game where it's piece removal that decides it. Like, you have a granular game where every model can be wearing different colored pants and be valued at different amounts. With that in mind, and with the way Horde armies function and the way heavy armies function, proportionately, you are of the same value. You have a point system to determine your value. I think that's the way you can do it. And then it's simply a difference between opponents to determine score. And so you do a game where you play 2,000 points. I'm going to do 1,000 points because the math is easier for me in my head, off the top of my head. Also, I hope you're enjoying this, like, press enter to continue, because apparently I can't play this game and talk at the same time, especially because I'm thinking about this. I'm not talking kill points. I'm talking like a hard number. Like, in this instance, I'm saying you play where you play the actual amount of points destroyed, and then the difference between the points that you destroyed and the points that your opponent destroyed is the determining factor in how many victory points you score. So, for example, if you were playing a 1,000 point game, and for every 100 point difference between you and your opponent, you score 1 point. That way, it doesn't matter how many turns the game goes to, though it sort of does, because you could still run into the sandbagging problem with round timers. But at least that way, 2 players who didn't play very many games, it's sort of old Warhammer Fantasy. I'm actually thinking more like Battlefleet Gothic right now, to be fair. But that is a way that you could try and do this. You could set it up in such a way that you at least you have that to try and mitigate the fact that someone else might not be able to score. If the game doesn't go as long and you have an early lead because you used your anti-tanks to snipe their tank and therefore you're up by points, and then they start sandbagging so that you can't score those points back, or they can't score those points back because you're sandbagging, that's hard to do. Horde armies might have an advantage because they could spread their points out. Chunking through 30 boys would be tough. Ostensibly, chunking through a 30 wound tank is hard too. Maybe it would turn to hordes versus hordes, because then every individual loss isn't as big a percentile of your total loss compared to a small army. But then you could maintain still having death clocks on rounds, so that having a horde army is a disadvantage in that the clock will suffer, but you gain an advantage by the fact that you're harder to remove solid chunks of your army. Maybe that's how it is. Oh, I'm saying you're not measuring destroyed units. You are measuring model by model. Like, you don't have to kill 30 boys to score their unit. How many boys in that unit did you kill? How many points were the models that you took out there get? What was the value on those models? Like, go through it entirely. And if it and what would that do to the meta? I don't know. Maybe it would make Space Marines good, because they're not that expensive and they're pretty okay. Kill the Warlord, win the game. Yeah, maybe. Make it so that snipers are the kings of it. But I think, regardless, to go back to the original like premise for what I was going to ramble about in this, maybe you do need to make it so that oh, there we go. I don't need to see this anymore. I'm trying to kill these goblins. Just die already. There we go. Maybe it does turn out that you have to something needs to be changed, because currently you're going to end up with the problems that I've described here. You're going to end up in a situation where people are going to play not within the bounds of the game. They're going to use whatever advantage they can that, like the orc army I described there. Yeah, just get wrecked, goblin. Paint your Orlocks. I don't have any Orlocks. Anyway, it was something I wanted to talk about because I'm not happy with the current tournament system. I think it's really, really bad. I think it's going to make people who have played this game no longer want to play it, and it's going to breed a rule set that has influenced the normal way you play this game. Things like only 3 of a data sheet, things like only deep striking turn 2, things like rolling off to determine first as opposed to just deploying to go first. These things were designed around a tournament meta that has made it so that everyone who plays this game is playing that tournament meta. And I think it damages the fun of this game. Where if you want to go to your hobby shop and just play somebody, you're not going to be able to just sit down and play the same game. Because if they get down and they take out the clock because they want to play a tournament game, because they're practicing for the next ITC, or they're going to Adepticon, or they're on their way to the local big event that you guys are going to have, and you're there because you just painted a new squad of Primaris Marines and you wanted to add them to your growing army of salamanders, you're gonna have a bad time. Your clock's gonna run out. They're gonna play with an army that doesn't really make a lot of sense within the context of the game. They're gonna play on scenarios that are totally like esoteric compared to how the game is being played. You're going to end up in a system where, why is that unit over there? Well, you have to, here's your 30 some odd secondary objectives. These are going to determine 12 out of your potential 40 points. So nearly more than a quarter of your score is determined by things that your opponent doesn't really have impact on. Oh, that's great. That's a good system. Yes and no. Because it means that now that you can determine how you want to score points, even if your opponent's army doesn't allow you to score this thing, or your army's not potentially going to be good at X or Y, so you can plan with these in mind. Great. What happened to holding objectives and killing the enemy? I don't know. I'm not happy with the way the clocks are. I recognize the reason why they're needed in the current system. My advice is, like I said before, plan your army, have your dice, have your widgets, have your things ready to go. That's probably the best way, and the way that you can kind of still play the game in a reasonable way. You can at least then have an army that isn't just like ridiculous spam or the loyal 32 of knights and custodies and whatever is the most effective system for stealing objectives and killing the enemy within the time. The simple answer is don't play those people. Doesn't really work if you're the only casual in the plot. The simple answer is don't play those people. It doesn't really work if you're the only casual player in the shop. And the thing is that it's bleeding into casual play because the literal rules are being changed to accommodate these kind of things. And I mean, you can play whatever you want in your basement, or you can go to the local store and play with your buddies, whatever game type you want. But there is something that needs to be said, that there is a tournament meta. There is a rule set for playing people who you don't know very well. And yes, you should strive to be the kind of person who's willing to play with other people in a way that you'll both have a good time. But not everyone has the same idea of what it is to be a good time. And that might be a problem. As a casual player, a lot of things are bleeding over from tournament play and becoming problematic. Yeah, because they're messing up your ability to collect the toys. And, like, I was shocked about the idea of a 3 battles, like, a 3, what are they called? 3 unit types, whatever the hell it's called. Three of the same unit, battle sheets or whatever it is. That is such an sales perspective. I'm shocked that they decided to let that one go into the, like, I used to make a comment that one of my favorite things about Games Workshop was that if you wanted, you could buy nothing but the start collecting boxes and have a reasonable army. You could play the game if you bought nothing but the start collecting boxes. And that there were not really any other games that you could do that with. Not any of them that are on the kind of scale like Games Workshop games are. That's no longer true for 40K. You can't. Maybe you'll get your unit of boys, one group of boys at a time, but as soon as you get to 3 dreads, you're done. And or 9 dreads, I guess, because maybe they're the unit of 3. But Trigons in the Tyranid box, there you go. And I'm like, why? Why did you do this? Oh, well, it wasn't fair if someone could bring 9 flying hive tyrants. Okay, what's the counter to flying hive tyrants? I don't know, but I bet it exists. I bet there's a perfect solution to dealing with them that you're not yet aware of. And now all that's done is, if you have a large group of troops, they're now the thing that you should spam because they were exempt from that rule. Or Knights, or Titans, or Forge World. Because these things have become now the thing, because you can get away with only bringing 3 of them. And, some of this is really shifty, kind of, technically 3 of a kind or not. Because the Knights aren't really the same data sheet, but Chaos Knights are the same data sheet. So you can only bring 3 Chaos Knights, but you can bring Knight Errant, Knight Paladin, Knight whatever. Okay, that's not within the spirit of that rule. That's not within the, what was the purpose of this? This was to prevent people from spamming high-powered units. Okay, wasn't that the purpose of the force organization charts? Wasn't that what the detachments were for? And why you have a limit on HQs? Oh, well, those actually don't do that job. Okay. Well, then what the hell is the purpose of that anymore? Here's a good one, actually. You make a good point there, Alexander. Stalkers do great against Flyrants, but no one brings them. I bet you the tractor cannons that the Orcs recently got would be really good against the Flyrant spam, too. But they banned it before it became challenged. They went, oh, this is too powerful. Let's get rid of that. Hey, all flying armies, you can't play that in a tournament anymore. So if you have a lot of planes, don't. Half your army can't only half your army can deep strike. Don't bring a deep striking army. Drop pods can only drop on turn 2. So that thing that you paid specifically to bring your guys in and attack the enemy with can't actually be done in the turn that you need. What in the fuck is going on that is making this so much away from the original rules of the game? The tournament rules are changing the way you can play your armies, play with your toy mans, in a way that's preventing you from buying more of the toy mans, and also changing the value inside the game of those same toy mans for rules that are beyond the normal rules that they were written with. Like the deep strike rule, like the deployment rule. I am not a fan of the tournament rule adjustments. And there's a great example of this, and I wish I understood it better, but I'll lay it out here, and I'm sure some of you guys out there will know. There was a meta in StarCraft 1 where there was I believe it was Zerg versus Protoss. And the win rate for the Zerg or the Protoss, whichever way this went, was like 60-40. So in thousands and thousands and thousands of games, they have a 60% win rate. That's pretty good. That is an exceptional win rate amongst the best players, obviously, based on the strategy that they used, based on the way they built their models and the way they built their units and how they used their units. People talked a lot about there needs to be a nerf. This is too powerful. This is resulting in that. Blizzard didn't really do anything about it. And then some guy, one of the high-level players of the other faction, let's say it was Protoss in this case, changed the way that he built, and it then resulted in switching it back over. The Protoss guy basically changed it, and the way he built his units, the order he used them in, the way he fought, flipped that 60-40 for Tyranid, or for Zerg, to 60-40 for Protoss, through no changes to the game. It changed it from, this army's too powerful, needs to be nerfed, because obviously it's too good, to let's play a different way, and it resulted in, with no balance or game mechanic changes, changing the entire outlook on how that interaction took place. And so you go from this is too powerful to that's too powerful, we need to nerf it, to let's just become creative. And this took years. This wasn't like a few months later. It took like 6 or 10 years or something crazy before this happened. And it totally blew up the way their game functioned. Why is it that these tabletop games, and I'm going to say tabletop games because this isn't a 40k specific one, though it's kind of just a 40k one currently. Oh, he's going to spot me, but I'm going to knife him. Oh, I missed him. Good job. All right. We'll rescue this dwarf. But the meaning behind what I'm trying to say here is that you gotta let these people play their game and find solutions. The balance changes, the constant updates to the game are damaging the way that you play this game more than anything else. I don't know what the counters were. I don't know what the solutions were to fix all of these things, but I'm willing to bet that they exist. That's the difference between playing the game and making your opponent play your game. Forcing your opponent to adapt his playstyle in order to play against you. Yeah, and honestly, it feels like that's what's going on here. I imagine this. So right now, it's fairly apparent that it's not the internal teams at GW adjusting some of these rules. And it's an outside perspective. Like War Machine has a perfect example of this, where they have their like community forum that balances their game and makes judgments based on whether things are balanced or not. You don't own everything in the game, and even if you did, it would take you years to go through every single possible combination to challenge another faction. And you're not going to be able to make a claim that something is too powerful until you do that. And that's basically my opinion of it. You need to let these things be decided based on years of time. There's other parts of this, like that adjusting and balancing and nerfing results in changing the perceived value of the things that you've bought. So like if you bought a unit because it was powerful in the game and then they changed the strength or damage output or whatever it may be that made it powerful, you now don't view it as powerful. That's a part of it too. But like, developers of tabletop and video games have this idea that removing RNG adds balance, when really the RNG makes perfect balance. Nothing fun about you play horse, I swear, I win every time. I think GW should only make points adjustments rather than rules, like deep strike, bolters, etc. It results in the same kind of thing. Like, mechanics and points are the same. Like, you're paying points for mechanics. So if you change the mechanics but keep the points, it's no different than if you had kept the points and changed the mechanics. You're paying points for this thing to happen. The problem is when you get to things that are like meta changes, like the way you can only deep strike on turn 2, but you can't deep strike after turn like 3 or 4 or whatever it is. That you can only bring 3 of a certain type of unit. That is a change that is beyond the points levels, because you can no longer work into it. Once again, I thought that was the point of having a detachment rule, to prevent you from being able to just bring whatever you want. That one gets me. It makes no sense to me. If you have a rule system called detachments that makes it so that you have to play with certain limits on whatever type of unit you can bring, and then you go, let's just also make this other requirement on top of that already existing limit. Warhammer Hordes has CID for balance issues, kind of for worst misused stuff. I've played a lot of War Machine. I don't play much anymore, but I played a lot of War Machine. Every single meta-breaking army list that has existed or ever existed in that game was beatable by playing with pieces of that game that weren't often seen. Now, maybe you could do it because it was dark horsing and your opponent didn't know how to do it. Or maybe you won because you had a counter to this tool. I don't believe it has that anymore. I do think there are probably balance issues that I'm not as up to date as I used to be. But whatever balance issues they may have, doing a readjust on entire chunks of the game every 6 months ain't gonna make your game fun to play. I literally dropped the 9th age because of this. I went, this is too much. I can't keep doing this. You ever play against Body and Soul in Mark II War Machine? I have played against everything in Mark II War Machine. Played that entire general feeling of that game. I feel the power level increase and increase of mechanics for each army is a major issue for balancing. Oh, there's something we could talk about too about Warhammer 40k. Is what is going on with why power level isn't used? Why is it points and not power level? Does anyone have a good reason? Definitely con. Live, dwarf, live. Don't tell me what to do, game. Yeah, I like to bleed. I like to make those goblins pay. They keep trying to add new things to spice up the game further. Is that them doing that? Or is that people want them to do that? I don't have any apples? Really? Oh, it needs me to go through all of my stupid... There, I looked at it. Can I go travel? Oh, I have to do this too. I want to build a campfire. There we go. I can't upgrade my campfire. 1, 2, 3. Wait, 1, 2, 3. Heal. Advice. There we go. New location is available. I would like to travel. And we want to go like that and explore. And then we're going to travel to this place. Power level lacks the granularity of and is inconsistent between the armies. Are you saying that points are not inconsistent between armies? How about conscripts versus guardsmen? Riddle me this, point level. Oh wait, no, that was a change because we had to balance how overpowered conscripts were. Give me them apples. Yeah. Oh wait, I can kill rabbits too. Come here, you little bastards. Oh, goblins are ahead. Sneak into their camp. Go murder some goblins. Anyway, I've gotten pretty far off topic of my original point. Oh, well that was silly. Of how to deal with clocks. People, you're more than welcome to go take a look. I've been spotted. Son of a bitch, he got me. I'll cut you so bad. You wish I hadn't cut you so bad. There we go. Break up this goblin camp. Collect up my gear. Release this dwarf. Welcome aboard, buddy. You want to work for me? You getting out of here? Alright, fine. Any more apples around? I don't think so. Let's go back to base. If we go back to the start, he outlined what he wanted to talk about. Yeah. So anyway, that was what I wanted to talk about. I'm kind of tempted to just stop this stream and like restart and then just kind of hang out and play games. Now that like 60 of you actually showed up and I didn't warn anyone, so maybe we'll pause. Everyone will all go get drinks and come back in 15 minutes. Hey, thank you, Sabas. Yes, it is almost my birthday. Yeah, so you know what? Actually, we'll do that. The game that I'm playing here is called Regions of Ruin. We'll take a brief pause and then come back into it. Oh wait, there we go. I asked about Body and Soul because it was probably the closest Mark II War Machine had to a list that people couldn't overcome without the most extreme dark horsing, but it didn't exist long enough for the meta to solve. Once again, you can release something new, but you got to give it time to see how it plays out. Maybe it was overpowered. Like, you don't know. Maybe Flying Hive Tyrants was unstoppable. But I don't think the what, 3 months, 6 months of 2-hour games played once every couple weeks or once every week was enough to decide that. Or the like 4 major events that had 3 to 5 games played in those events was enough to decide that that was the most overpowered thing. How many games is that? 100? Maybe 1,000? Is 1,000 games enough to decide every single possible combination that could be challenging in Warhammer 40k and play them out? Do you think that's enough? I do not. I am of the belief that you need to give these things a lot of time. Not a lot of people play. Like, I play a lot of miniature games. I play a ton of games of War Machine, a ton of games of a lot of stuff. I play more miniature games than most people know about. And I can tell you, these things, they take a long time to get into every piece of it. A lot of people know what they play, and they know what armies their friends play, and they have a vague idea of the other armies that exist out there. You're not really like gonna know. And I talk to like game designers. No, I'm not throwing any shade. Designing games is a crazy in-depth nightmare. There's so many possibles that you are not gonna foresee, and maybe it turns out that something you didn't foresee becomes a game-breaking, overpowered thing. But maybe it's just not being challenged by something else that already exists. Maybe it is just overpowered. I've had this opinion too about things. I think that the skeletons in Relic Blade are overpowered, but Sean doesn't believe me. And then we played a game, and he brought the hard counter to the skeletons, and he kicked my teeth in. And I'm like, well, it only matters then if you bring the counter. And his response is, then bring the counter. And thus the conversation kind of ended there. And that's how it is. Like, you gotta be aware of these things. So, moral of the story is, I'm not a big fan of the clocks. I don't know what you can do in the current rule system without changing the score to not use clocks. And if you are going to use clocks, do one of the things I said earlier on here. Whether it is optimize your play by having all of the tools you need to make yourself be able to play quickly and effectively, or optimize your list so that you can play the game normally, but with models and styles that are within the bounds of as few dice rolls, as few actions or interactions as you can. This reminds me of This Is Not a Test. I ended up with a power armor guy with strength 11 compound bow. My opponent asked the Facebook page about it. Bam. FAQ put on strength limit on them. Yeah. You want to watch a long story of things getting changed and nerfed from a rules perspective? Go read the Rogue Stars Facebook page. Rogue Stars is a neat game, but goddamn was there a lot of powerful stuff if you wanted to play it in a min-maxing kind of way. It started with dual-wielding SMGs who needed nerfed. Then it was just rapid fire that needed nerf. Then it was ambidextrous that needed nerf. But then we changed it from that to jump packs, and then jump packs to jump packs with net launchers. And then, oh, there's only one counter to net launchers, so we got to change that. It is an example of things like that. I think it's a great idea of a game, and I think it plays well if you can play with a bunch of people who are like, let's have fun and make Space Jedi. That's cool. But do not try and play that game with a min-max like I did, because you're going to have a bad time. And I'm worried about 40k in games like that I enjoy playing, that are trying to make the perfect game and not giving games time to make themselves, if that makes sense. Like, the metas aren't developing enough. Like, if you have 2 major conventions a year that are your big 2 tournaments, and the same list wins both of them, does that mean that list is overpowered and there's no counter? I'm going to leave that as a standing comment. Leave a comment down below, for those of you watching in post, about whether you think that is enough to justify nerfing anything in either of those armies. And that's where we're going to end it. And I will come back and we'll start another live stream where I'll play Regions of Ruin and less focus on wanting to talk about this, because apparently I can't play this game because my lacerated waist, my cut abdomen, and my split calf are because I'm basically zoned out while I was talking. And I couldn't talk while playing it. So, in hindsight, maybe we just have a whole bunch of pre-recorded gameplay if I want to ramble about something like this. But either way, I'll be back in, like, let's say 15, 20 minutes, because I'm going to have get a drink, and then we'll go. Cool? All right. Peace out, guys. I'll be back in a few.